on the theme of human sexual trafficking a little bit longer, but we saw an overview. Mr. Truman gave an excellent overview, as did Mr. Olson, Dr. Clinton, and also Dr. Dines. But we wanted to see if this is really just on a national scene, or is this really something that concerns us here in Spokane. So I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Aaron Tilbury, who's the founder of the Jonah Project. And the Jonah Project serves at-risk youth and victims of human trafficking right here in Spokane. In the spring of 2016, Aaron and his wife, Bindi, opened the Lighthouse, Spokane's only operating safe home for child victims of sex trafficking. Since then, Real Life, New Horizon, and other local churches, schools, and businesses have come on board to support the freedom movement through the Jonah Project. The Jonah Project is now educating students in schools, relocating victims to safety, housing children in need, and advocating for women across the city. The Jonah Project partners with agencies such as Homeland Security and the FBI, as well as schools, churches, and groups like the 611 Network to fight for freedom and be a voice for those who've had theirs taken away. If you haven't had a chance to say hello to the special agents of Homeland Security, they're out there, they have an exhibit. So if you have time during the break, stop by and say hello. Mr. Tilbury speaks at churches, universities, high schools throughout the area about the need for our community to take its place in the fight for freedom until, quote, every last woman or child is brought home, end quote. His professional background is in both coaching and executive protection. Born in the Bay Area of California, he now calls Spokane his home, along with his wife and 2 sons. Please help me welcome Mr. Aaron Tilbury.
Appreciate the door that's been opened for us to share today. My wife is sitting down at the table as well. She's our director of advocacy. Bindi, would you throw your hand up? And my good friend who actually, yeah, thank you. Yeah, she does deserve a, yeah. My sons are here as well, and sitting next to my wife on the left is my friend and my pastor, Andrew Allen. I pastor at the Bridge. Some of you may know that. Andrew is the head pastor there and my pastor. And so Andrew was actually the guy who was sitting in a minivan with me when I walked away from a public high school, and I said, they're actually going to let me walk around here and talk to kids. And we sat there for about 20 minutes realizing what a miracle it was that a door was being opened into schools. So we now have 6 different schools with some of our education materials and stuff in there. But that was the beginning of Jonah for us. And so we're going to talk today certainly about teen sex trafficking, trafficking in general. As you know, there are a couple of other speakers that are going to address that. What I hope that we're really talking about here, aside from obviously the conference on pornography and what that does, is freedom. If we're talking about someone who is battling addiction or a struggle with an issue, whether it's pornography or something else, we're talking about their freedom being taken away. Today, we've had some amazing speakers share about the process of how that freedom is slowly eroded. In trafficking, we talk a lot about the term grooming. And that's really what you guys have seen on a mass scale here. So whether it's Gail talking about a world or international level and culture, or in this case, we're going to talk about Spokane and what that looks like. We are talking about the influences and the things that conspire to strip away freedom, in this case, from our children. As you guys may already know, the average age of a sex trafficking victim when they are first trafficked is about 11 or 12. The average age of a kid that Andrew and Bindi and my team work with is about 15. And what that means is that, and if you were to scroll up, in fact, if you guys have a smartphone, pull out jonahproject.org on your smartphone. I'm going to show you guys how to access some resources, and you guys are going to do it the same way a victim would on the street. But if we scroll up a little bit, you're going to see some interesting statistics. Some of them are pretty harrowing, and I know numbers can just get old after a while. I've sat with friends and asked, am I becoming calloused when I see the 350,000 number for the number of trafficking victims in the nation? But there are still some numbers that change the way I lay my head on the pillow at night. 7 years, the average life expectancy of someone who's been trafficked. So when I'm talking with a 15-year-old girl that a high school counselor has called us to come and speak with, or when Andrew and his wife are being called to go pick up a young lady who's huddling for shelter in a porta potty. This is 2 nights ago when it's 11 degrees because she was 10 minutes late getting to the shelter, so she doesn't get that resource that night. We are talking about kids that many times have already been trafficked for a while, and so the first time I meet them, that clock is ticking. How much longer before we lose them forever? I really appreciate Homeland Security being here. I don't know if Shannon or Shane are in the room. They're probably at the booth right now talking with people, but Special Agents Shannon and Shane, I really would recommend that you speak with them if you get a chance. There is a link under what is human trafficking on our website. There's a link to the Department of Homeland Security. So I just want to give them a plug real quick. They are, in our opinion, in terms of law enforcement, the best that do this. And I don't mean just rescuing and relocating, and I don't mean just educating. I mean understanding what it looks like to walk a human being who's been taught that they are no longer a human being back to life. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a human being who has been marginalized to the point where they don't see themselves as human. A program or a facility is not going to heal that. This is indeed a freedom issue. At every other point in time in human history, when freedom has been at stake, it has taken people who are not maybe directly impacted by a problem to rise up and stand with the people that are, to be a voice for people that have had their voices taken away. Now, I've got some good news for you. 2003 was the first time an anti-trafficking law was passed by a state in this country. 2003. That was Washington. That's some good news. And yet it was half a decade later was the first time we did even a partial study on the epidemic. And in that study by the Seattle Times in 2008, it determined that here in Spokane, there were approximately 500 to 600 children and women in slavery. I've heard the word prostitution a lot. I'm not going to use that a ton, but I will address it quickly. We are talking about children. It is not even a legal choice for them to make. It's not prostitution. We need to have our lens changed or cleaned. We are talking about human beings marginalized to the point where they actually don't get to make choices. They don't get to choose their relationships. They don't get to keep the money that is made from them. The average pimp supposedly makes $200,000 a year and controls 4 to 6 victims. Victims like the young lady who told me all about trafficking for the first time. The Jonah Project is 4.5 years old. So I will tell you that 5 years ago, if you asked me about human trafficking, I would have assumed that it happened someplace maybe Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe. So I kind of like to be a little interactive, and I'm going to ask you guys some questions. And the first is, who other than me 5 years ago didn't really realize human trafficking was a thing here? Is it just me? Okay, great. That is pretty representative of the response I get everywhere I go. 500 to 600 women and children, that was 2008. It's 2019, people. And you've got a guy who's not even from Spokane who started a volunteer organization 4 years ago talking with you guys about the issue. And I'm going to tell you that fear is the biggest weapon these bad guys have. We've been talking here and there about what are the things we can do. The first thing we can do is we can start pushing on the powers that be to have an open conversation in this city about what the problem really looks like and what we need to do to address it. It is complex. I was volunteering for a local high school's baseball team. There was a kid getting ready to go play a baseball game in a pair of socks. And surely I did nothing that any of you would not have done. Maybe you would have asked your wife first before spending the last $20 in your checking account. But other than that, you probably would have done the same thing I did. You go to Ross and you buy the kid a pair of cleats. It turns into a conversation. It turns into some shared pizza after practice. 8 or 9 months later, we're just helping kids with coats and shoes, water bills when it's necessary. And then a young girl that had gone with a group of friends to a Dairy Queen. And at that time, there was no website, there was no flyers, there was no funding, there was not a team. It was me at a local high school. And so I would write my number on a sticky note. And I would pass it to these kiddos and I'd say, look, the time's gonna come, you're at a party, the cops decide they're gonna come, you don't wanna be there. When they do, call me, I'll come get you. Or somebody's gonna decide they wanna do something, or the party goes sideways and it's not fun anymore, and you wanna get home before trouble starts, call me, I'll come get you, no judgment. I do not care what happened to get you there, I just wanna get you home. And so this young lady one day asked her school counselor, she was being seen for an eating disorder, if she could speak with Aaron. And the counselor said, who in the world is that? She said, you know, the bald guy with the tattoos walking around our high school. Needless to say, a few minutes later, as I was sitting in that counseling office looking out the glass window at 4 or 5 counselors wondering, why are we even letting this happen? This young lady began to detail for me what was going on in her life. In my background, I did some hostage rescue work, and I can tell you I have not seen anything, heard anything this brutal in my entire life up to that point. We're talking about kids enslaving other kids. The pimp had already impregnated her sister and was in her math class. In fact, as the teacher would turn around to write on the dry erase board, he would often whisper, you know, you're next. I mentioned I was not going to use the word prostitution much. I'm going to mention it at least one more time and right now. Many of you guys have seen the story that was in Crim and KXLY News. I think it's about 5 years old now. 4.5, 5 years old. And it was reported as a child prostitution ring that was brought down. It's human trafficking. It's modern slavery. The language needs to change. That young girl should have the right to be seen as a victim and receive care and services, not go back to a cafeteria and having teachers and counselors and other students whispering about, hey, isn't this the girl that was prostituting herself? We've got this thing whole screwed up. So I guess my question would be, and here's an interactive question, you guys can answer this one. If there were truly 600 women and children locked away in 2008, do you think that number's gone down? I've heard numbers anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200. I don't know what the numbers are. I can tell you, Al's right. We're gonna keep working as long as we have funding. We're gonna keep working until every one of these children and women gets to come home. But even if it was 601, that's too much. And even if it was 601 and tonight, and this doesn't exist, but let's just say that there was a highly trained team of operatives employed by our city. Like, let's say instead of spending $75 million on Riverfront Park, we spent the $800,000 necessary to fund an anti-trafficking team. Let's just say that they, in their awesome black outfits and special flashlights, started kicking down doors and pulling women and children out of trap houses left and right in this city, and we got all 601 rescued tonight. Where would they go? Who's going to love them? Who's going to walk with them as long as it takes for a human being to heal? Because we're really good about giving programs with end dates. It answers questions for us. We're really terrible sometimes about engaging a human being relationally and saying to them, no matter what. And that's what this is going to take. I love the question about what can we do. We're very busy as a society. If you're too busy donate. But I would implore you to ask yourself, what are you so busy with that is more important than our children? Because they are being taken from us right underneath our noses. I actually, and my wife and her team, we work with schools all over the area. We have our education materials for free in 6 different schools. And yet I've talked to several school principals who will not talk about this subject on the school campus because their fear, coming back to the one weapon that the bad guys have, is that their school would be seen as the epicenter of the problem. They don't want the news article to be about how their local high school is the epicenter of the problem. And so the children just continue to be uneducated. We're talking about 11 and 12-year-olds being targeted. We talk about slavery in class as long as it's happening to African Americans 200 years ago. But we will not talk about the 12-year-old who is taken from the house right down the street from our high school because it's too dark. And I appreciate what the speaker said earlier. We don't want to talk about it in churches either. We have 6 churches that are supporting what we're doing right now. I think a 7th. There are 498 churches in Spokane County. One of the other numbers that you see up there, 1 in 7. 1 in 3 kids will be solicited within 48 hours of becoming homeless. Anybody know how many homeless kids we have in the Spokane County area? Approximately 4,000. And by the way, again, because politicians don't want to be lit up for things that they don't have answers to, that doesn't include the kids that I'm talking to that have gotten enough resources to find a couch to crash on. Did you know that? A kid could be a freshman in high school, sleeping on a different couch every night, is not considered homeless. Doesn't count in the stats. What would the number be really? I don't know. If we're going to address this issue, and this is one of the things that Jonah figured out early on, we need to be both reactive and proactive. You've heard about Lighthouse. On our website, under Survivor Resources, there's a tab. I'd love you guys to take a look at that. If you were a victim, and if you have your phone out right now and you were going to navigate this, there's a tab on our website called Survivor Resources. That'll give you some basic questions, right? We got to keep it simple. And one of the tabs on there is Lighthouse. It'll tell you about our safe home and how we operate that. So it's important. In fact, you guys might have just seen an article in the local news about a house here that the state pays $40,000 a year so that they can house and rehabilitate sexual predators. And by the way, I am a man of faith. I don't believe that there's anything past redemption. That's why we named it the Jonah Project. But I will tell you this, there is something inherently wrong with us being able to come up with funding to rehabilitate men in houses, and we send the women and children to shelters. Amen. So one of the things that we can do is we can be a voice, a real voice, and we can start showing up at City Hall. Show up, support Jonah, or support another organization that's pushing. Why aren't we having an open conversation? Now, I'm going to give you some statistics or just some data that I got from the sheriff's department. A couple years ago, they ran a sting operation. This is typically how law enforcement has to go about it, right, is getting buyers. And so they posted an ad for a 9-year-old and a 15-year-old. You guys hear about this already? Some of you are shaking your head. You've heard about this. Others haven't. There were 6,000 responses for the 15-year-old. And so many responses for the 9-year-old that the server shut down. Now, it wasn't the same 9-year-old, but it was just a couple months after that we got a call from a Round Table Pizza, and I showed up with my wife, and there was a 9-year-old girl laying on the floor of a restaurant. And as we were walking in to serve her, we saw 4 or 5 different people taking their to-go boxes, literally stepping over the body of a 9-year-old child in a Round Table Pizza right up here on Francis. Was that 9-year-old being trafficked? We had no idea. And guess what? Neither would any of you if you don't relationally engage with a human being. That's what it's going to take. So if you went to Homeland Security, for example, or the FBI.gov or one of these other sites, you'd see typically a list of about 25 different red flags, right? Things to look for. How do you identify a trafficking victim? Things like, is somebody else controlling their documents? Do they have control of their own money, or is somebody else holding on to their money? Can they come and go freely? Do they know what time of day it is? Some really, really great indicators. And again, we have a link to Homeland Security on our website. But the thing I noticed the first time I looked at that list of 25 things, and if they're accurate, it should be pretty much the same list across the board, and it is that I wouldn't know a single answer to any one of those questions unless I engaged a human being. But I can tell you this, the bad guys, they study it. They can tell by the way a young lady walks off of the Greyhound bus downtown and across a parking lot whether or not she's been sexually abused as a child, whether or not she's just ripe for them to begin grooming. They already know she's probably struggling with resource if she's getting off a Greyhound bus. What angle can be leveraged here? Sometimes I think we have this image of a white van with tinted windows and duct tape, and it just doesn't work that way all the time. The last time I pulled a young lady out from an alleyway, she was half clothed behind a 7-Eleven downtown, and as she got into the truck, right, and I'm just gonna tell you, as a grown man that has children, you want to wrap your arms around this child and hold them with everything you've got. But you can't all the time. And she says to me, how could they do this to me? I thought they loved me. Who doesn't want to feel loved? I do. This is an insidious process, this dismantling of our children's confidence and eroding of their freedom. This process of grooming it's heinous. And it happens every day here on every campus. I actually go to schools and I teach kids about grooming, and they teach other kids. We have a student rally on the 9th, and you're gonna hear some kids sharing about this. See, this thing about freedom, pornography included, a lot of times kids think they're making the free choice. They don't understand that their freedom has been warped or maybe even taken away. This idea of pornographic addiction, which is real and biological, that's what we're talking about, right? Someone who would have a struggle now to say no to something that's actually harmful to them. Even after making a choice of wanting to walk away from this, they would still engage with it, even though it's harmful to them. For some of us, that might seem like a foreign concept. I want to be interactive here for just a moment. And I will raise my hand with it. Who here has felt guilty or ashamed before? Thank you for being honest. What about anxious? What about anxious and you can't figure out why? Yeah. You can't get it to go away, that anxious feeling. Yeah? Who here has felt betrayed by someone that they thought they could trust? Someone, maybe an intimate partner or friend? Yeah. Had a confidence broken? I appreciate your honesty. If you're willing to be honest, I just got a couple more for you. Who here has maybe betrayed the trust of someone they cared about? Felt terrible about it? Yeah. The last question I'll ask you is, who here has felt isolated and alone? Like these feelings that we're talking about, maybe the person next to you was probably not the best person to talk to you about it because they would be like, you're crazy, I have no idea. Yeah, that's what happens. It's like this isolation feeling. So I realize I'm not talking to a room of trafficking victims, but the emotions that I just talked to you about are actually the list of responses that trauma victims feel. Anxious, alone, can't get the feeling of fear to go away, not sure why they're depressed, betrayed, they betrayed someone else, ashamed, guilty. These are some of the reasons why they don't reach out for help. And so that could be a hurdle and a barrier. Why would I ask you guys those questions? How about this? Because whether you know it or not, you are uniquely equipped to dive into this freedom fight. You are uniquely equipped to be an answer, a solution to this problem. The safe house that we operate, we've had no incidents there in a couple years. We've worked with a lot of kids. It's awesome. But I will tell you this, there is no resource or refuge like the human heart. That engaging human being thing that has to happen. Because if we rescued all 601 of them, and I already asked you a question, where would they go and who would love them? And I didn't get an answer, and that's okay. I wasn't expecting one. But what if it was my house? Now, I know that might seem really scary, and probably everything in the world would tell you, you are not qualified to care for or love or help a trafficking victim back to healing. Let me ask you this. We are building something called Freedom Railroad, but you know what? It's not as big and successful as the Underground Railroad was. Harriet Tubman was the best to ever do it. It's my hero. And when she was looking for the next hub on that railroad, someplace for a slave to hide as they sought freedom, do you think she was hyper concerned with whether or not the owners of that farm had a degree in trauma therapy? Or is she more concerned with, will you put your agenda in your back pocket for a minute to love another human being? Will you keep them from the bad guys? And maybe a little bit of, will you help us carry this weight together? Because this slavery thing's about to get heavy. This is not a light topic, and I get it. I appreciate, again, the space and the time that you guys are affording me to talk about this. We can be agents of change. It's been talked about from multiple angles. I want to talk about the Pornography Connection just very briefly, because I know Gail's going to talk about that in more detail later. But when I asked my wife, I said, hey, you know, I haven't studied a bunch of statistics on pornography. I don't know what we're really, what the numbers are. I've seen stats that say a quarter of porn, a third of porn is actually forced labor. And I said, but with the young ladies and the kiddos that we're talking to in these intakes, it seems a little higher than that. How many of them have been videotaped? She said over half. It's actually one of the techniques that's used to not just groom, but to force, right? You guys have heard the force, fraud, and coercion thing. So it's not just a poverty thing. It's not just a lack of resources. It's Betty, the sophomore at the affluent high school down the road, who does one thing at a party that she wishes she never would have done, but they got it on a cell phone. So now every Friday night, she has to tell her mom that she's going over to Rebecca's house to study, and she has to perform again. After a time or two, looking in the mirror, she doesn't see Betty anymore. In fact, if she's not careful, she's going to begin to see herself as the name that the traffickers make her answer to. And she knows that there's no way she could talk to mom about this, right? It's too terrible. And so she doesn't. And the clock keeps ticking. Or maybe it's the young lady who, in front of City Hall a couple years ago, sat next to me and detailed for 9 straight minutes the most horrific stuff I'd ever heard, including being tied to a water heater here for a week without food and water. The bad guy doesn't go to jail, so now when she gets on a bus at some point to go apply for a job, or she goes down to DSHS to get a food card, and she runs into the guy's drug dealer in a parking lot, she's traumatized all over again. And so what we see is, regardless of whether it's 600 or 1,000, we are in a community that is right in the middle of a trafficking belt. North Dakota, Seattle, we are right in the middle of a belt where they run human beings, kids younger than my sons, like it's a rodeo. Now, we may have an anti-trafficking law here, but there's not one in Idaho. So do you know what the bad guys do if they're at a hotel in say, Spokane Valley, and they feel like the cops might catch them? They just go get a hotel in Idaho, convincing the girls that, hey, if you call, you know, you're just going to get prosecuted as a prostitute. You're not a victim here in Idaho. This is a civil rights issue. This is a human rights issue. Just like in the 1960s, it wasn't an issue of law when African Americans showed up at the voting booths to vote. The law was in place to allow them to vote. The issue was the very authorities and resources that were supposed to protect those rights didn't do so. Right now in Spokane, it's like the Wild West out here. And we're really lucky to have Shane and Shannon. But the traffickers know it too. So how do we get on the other side of this? Support an organization that's doing some type of advocacy, like real advocacy. I'm telling you, there's a difference. I've had to actually go and take girls back from agencies where I sent them to be housed because we can't get out of our own way and our own programs to love a human being first. Here's what it's gonna look like. They're gonna make decisions that sometimes you don't like. They're learning what freedom is. We're gonna have to be okay with that. Will we love them anyway? I talk to my sons, and I'm sure if you guys have kids, you have had this conversation. If you go and you drink, and you better not drink, do not drive. You call me and I'll come get you. Right? That's our child. We love them. It's not about judging the fact that they drank. It's about getting them safe. It's about telling them, I want you home. And that's not the message these kids are getting. They're getting the message that they need to have everything cleaned up and fixed before they'll be welcomed back into society. You can change that. I'm going to close here because I want to be respectful of time. We have to be both proactive and reactive. We have to not only engage children before this stuff starts happening, we have to be ready and willing to provide resources after it has. Jonah is a volunteer organization. There are a few churches that support us. We could really use your financial support. Average facility runs $8,000 to $12,000 a month. I don't believe that children should heal in a facility. I think they should heal in a home. But to give you some perspective, it runs about $2,000 a month for Lighthouse. Almost half what they're paying for the house, by the way, that the state is for the predators. Because we have a lot of people in this community now that have rallied around this movement, this freedom thing. These kids are beginning to taste it and they want it. When they realize they're being groomed, they're running off and telling their other friends what it looks like. And you have children educating other children. The game can change, and it can change quickly. And so I hope I'm talking to a group of people that will think about, meditate on, or pray about where they can take a place at the table. Every single one of you has a place at this table. Every single one of you has a role to play in either telling a human being that they're valuable and that they're wanted, or going with me and my team to go get them out of one of the trap houses, or going with us down to City Hall and saying, hey, we need to end this child prostitution language. The media, it needs to make up its mind. It's human trafficking. You report it otherwise and you're misinforming the public. These are things that can be done. They're things that we hope as a project that we can do alongside you guys. Just like with Homeland Security. And here's why that's such a big deal to me. I'm a volunteer, and so is my wife, so is our team. This isn't an issue of a paycheck for me. I got a kid a pair of cleats, and the next thing you knew, I found out there was some really terrible stuff slipping through the cracks here, and we needed to do something. That's how this started for us. But I'm gonna tell you why it's so important that we come together as we finish. Because every time I go into one of those houses, and I don't care how bad the bad guys are, we're going. And every time I go in there and I tell one of these women or these children, there is a society, a people, a city that wants you back, wants you home, wants to love you, wants to heal you, wants to apologize for not taking a more active role in what happened to you in the first place. It would be awesome if it wasn't just my voice saying it. See, every time you come alongside to support, whether it's pushing at City Hall, whether it's funding, whether it's joining our advocacy team and helping Bindi with care inside a safe home, whatever that looks like, you join the voice that says, we love you, you matter to us, and we will do whatever it takes to bring you home. Thank you for your time.